It was a windy day, with a cold chill in the air, but I was fine. I had my hood up, headphones in, and my head down, whilst I was walking back from a friend's house. I walked through the familiar pathway I take to get home through the park. It was in the early hours of the morning, but there were still people walking around minding their own business, mostly the drunks trying to get home. The wind started to get harder and faster, slashing my hair into my eyes. I turned up my music to block out the sound of the gushing wind. Then the rain started, the wind blowing and the rain hitting my face. It felt like tiny beads were being thrown at me. I closed my eyes for a moment and I picked up the pace, every now and then pulling my hair out my face and putting my hood back on my head. I could still just about hear the sound of the trees above, their branches shaking. They were large trees, intimidating, and it looked dangerous to be under them right now. So I sped up. I kept my head down, looking at my shoes. My long laces were getting filthy and soaked in the rain, but I kept going. Well, I kept going until I approached something I don't know how to describe. It was a branch, lying across half a path and half a person. The back of their head was completely covered by it. I took off my headphones and was suddenly met with the screams of people around, some running towards the incident, others just running away. People began to cover their face, but I just stood there, with my hands by my sides, with wide eyes like a deer caught in the headlights, staring at a face-down, lifeless body spread half across the path, and half on the grass. A few seconds after I started to see the blood leaking out from underneath their face, in a small puddle, getting larger. I looked up, and there was a distressed man standing with phone in hand, shaking, calling an ambulance. There was no need for me to be there, so I began to run through the park as fast as I possibly could, my feet slapping down in the puddles. I didn't want to think about that person and what had happened. Man, that could have been me. It still could be. The wind was blowing so hard and the trees towered over me, but I kept running, faster and faster, to get home, into the safe haven of my house. My eyes fluttered open and I sat up in bed. Oh my God, what a disturbing dream I just had. I tried not to think about it, but it was so vivid in my mind after I woke up. I still had my shoes on, and the covers off. I looked up at the clock, and it was completely stationary. So I sighed. I reached into my pocket for my phone. Shit, it wasn't there. My heart began to pound. I'd just lost my brand new phone. My parents were going to kill me. Ugh. But I wasn't in the mood to worry about that right now. I had a banging headache, and I couldn't remember when I'd fallen asleep in my clothes. I took off my shoes and let my toes sink into the carpet. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the hot tap in the bath. Letting the water run, I left the room for a moment, as my head couldn't withstand the sound of running water with such a banging headache. I lay my back against the door and sigh, waiting for the bath to fill. I look at my nails. They were filthy, clogged with mud and grot. Ugh. I took off my jacket and ran my hands down my arm, feeling a graze on my elbow. As soon as I looked at it, it began to sting, but it was similar to the sort of pain a child would endure when they graze their elbow on the school playground. I left the jacket on the banister as I went back into the bathroom. I timidly dipped my finger into the bath, and it was boiling hot. I winced, and in shock jumped backwards, but at the same moment I heard a sharp crack like a crisp packet being clenched in someone's fist. I looked over my shoulder to the right to see a shattered mirror. Tiny pieces of glass began to fall into the sink, so I stopped the bath running and backed out of the room slowly, making sure the mirror didn't fall onto me. What had made it just so suddenly break like that? It couldn't have been something thrown. That would have given off a spiderweb effect on the mirror. But no, this was evenly spread, nearly complete squares of broken mirror. I didn't understand, so I looked next door into my mum's room. I knocked on the door, and there was no answer, so I turned the handle and popped my head through, calling for her. But there was no one there, which was unusual for my mother, because she'd always been a bit of a clean freak. I quickly checked all the other rooms upstairs, but there was no one home. I wandered downstairs, beginning to think how strange everything was, how I didn't remember falling asleep in my clothes. I had no idea of the time. I'd lost my phone, I had a strange graze, the mirror in the bathroom had broken so strangely, and the house seemed empty. And not forgetting that disturbing dream, I couldn't get the image of the puddle of blood just spreading out of my head. When I arrived downstairs, I could suddenly hear a strange sound, muffled talking, so I ran through the living room and into the kitchen. I looked up and the kitchen TV was on. There was no sign of the remote to turn it off, and I wasn't tall enough to reach the button, so I lifted myself up onto the counter and looked down at how dirty my jeans were. I put my hand on my lap, and it felt damp. Really damp down by my knee, and my jeans were slightly discoloured there. I turned around and closed the blinds behind me, noticing it was dark outside. I bent down and rolled up my jeans. Blood began trickling down my leg as I got to the top of my knee, and there was a huge open wound just oozing blood. And it seemed that the more I appeared to gawk at it, the more I started to feel pain. The pain was now shooting through my leg and stung as panic tears dripped into it. I screamed and called out for anyone to hear me, but all I got was the reply of the TV talking nonsense to me. That nonsense you get when there's nothing else. Japanese aerobic DVD adverts. My screams and calls were met with smashes and clanks around me, the entire room seemingly torn apart. Drawers were opening, a cupboard door fell off, shelves of cookbooks spread across the floor. And as I stopped calling out for help, it stopped. I used one leg and helped myself down off the counter, and limped into the living room, throwing myself onto the sofa in an excruciating amount of pain. I propped up a cushion behind my head, but as I moved them around behind me, I could feel that they were damp. I knew what was coming. As I felt the back of my head, all over my face and across my forehead. Blood. All over me. My headache came back, more alive than any I'd had. As all of this blood gushed across my body, I screamed, grabbing the phone, calling myself an ambulance, but as soon as they got to the operator, they couldn't hear what I was saying. They couldn't hear me. Time had stopped. My world was empty. I could break things with screams and stress. I could only feel pain when I'm looking at the wound. And that's when it sunk in. It wasn't a dream. That was when I realised. That wasn't any lifeless body I was looking at. It was me. And I could feel it. I could see, as I looked up, the branch falling towards me. I could feel it when it hit my head, when I first fell heavily onto my right knee across the pavement, and then my elbow scraping across the wet grass, my nails sinking deeper into the mud as I pulled myself across the floor, clogging my fingernails with dirt, my face hitting the floor and myself tasting my own puddle of blood. I could hear the screams around me, a deep voice asking for an ambulance, his distressed words in a slightly drunken slur, and the pain. I could feel the pain run through my entire body. But my eyes fluttered shut.